Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. We're here at Trinity Wesleyan Church so that we can unleash hope to those around us, and that includes you. So thank you for being a part of what's going on in our church, even through technology. We hope that this video is a blessing to you, and at the end, you're going to see some next steps and ways that you can get involved even after this video is done.
1 or 2, 1 or 2. The funny thing about vision, sometimes what we see isn't wrong. It's just not clear. And before we know it, we're seeing double. But God offers something better. Not louder voices, but clearer vision. When God shapes your vision, everything else comes into focus.
I remember when I got glasses and I lived in Sturgis, South Dakota. I was about 22 or 23 at that time, hadn't worn glasses since I was in elementary school, so it had been a good 10 to 12 years since I wore glasses. Things were starting to get blurrier than I realized, and so I got a bigger TV because it wasn't HD enough. It was starting to get blurry, but I'm finding out it was actually my eyes that needed a little HD in them. And I loved looking at the Black Hills when we lived there. And I would always stare at them when I was driving. It never got old. Every time we drove on the highway between Sturgis and Walmart, about 30 minutes away, I would always be looking at the hills, and it just felt so big and I felt so small. And it reminded me of God during creation making nature for us to see and worship Him. And I love staring at the hills. When we were at home, I would stand in the front yard and I'd look at the cliff that Sly Hill Road was on. Now there's hills and there's mountains, and they've always fascinated me. I've loved the mountains. And there's a reason I'm saying hills, the Black Hills, and not mountains. And some of you may see these pictures and call them mountains. And I was exactly like you and thought they were mountains when I had seen them. Because I had been to the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, and they're tall, but they're not as tall as the Black Hills. So there's a place called Black Elk Peak in the Black Hills, and it was the highest point between the it is the highest point between the Swiss Alps and the Rocky Mountains. It stands at just over 7,200 feet in elevation, so it's tall. And you can ask me another time why they're called the Black Hills. It's interesting, but that's for another time. So they're, number one, it's called the Black Hills. Black Hills, like you can't call them the Black Hills Mountains. And number two, when Jen and I, we went to Denver to see my Boston Red Sox get walloped by the Rockies. It changed my mind when I saw the Rocky Mountains. The Black Hills are tall, but compared to the Rocky Mountains, they're definitely hills. There's a reason they're called hills, and I formally want to submit my request to change the name of the Appalachian and Smoky Mountains to the Appalachian Hills and the Smoky Hills. After you've been to the Rocky Mountains and have explored and traveled and hiked in the Rocky Mountains, the Black Hills are barely a bump in the road in comparison. Anyway, I love looking at the hills, love looking at mountains. I remember after the eye doctor's office and I got my glasses, I put them on and I was shocked. I did not realize how much depth there was in the trees in the Black Hills that I was looking at. I remember telling Jen, who has been a glasses or contacts wearer since elementary school, that everything was in high definition. Everything was in HD. I would take them off and I would put them back on, and I was amazed. I would just take them off, put them on, take them off, put them on. I'm just like, wow, there's so much I can see, and everything is clear. And I just started thinking, I was like, I can see clearly now. The rain is gone. You ever notice how stressful the eye doctor is? Like they flip that little lens in front of your face and they ask, better or worse? And suddenly it feels like you're making a life-altering decision, like you're staring at a blurry letter that might be an E or a backwards comb or a 3, and maybe it's a smudge on the wall, and they're waiting. They're like, better or worse, 1 or 2, and you panic. You're like, better, and they flip it back, better or worse, and now you're second-guessing everything. We're like, what if I answered wrong? What if I just committed to wear the wrong prescription for the whole year? And what if this is why I've been slightly blurry because I don't know how to answer questions, just a yes or no, better or worse? Most of us don't like that moment at the doctor's office. We don't like not being sure. We don't like living in the tension between option 1 and option 2. We want certainty. We want clarity immediately. We want to lock in the lens and move on. But sometimes the only way to get clarity is to sit in the adjustment and sit in the questions. And that's exactly what Proverbs chapter 16 verse 9 is talking about when it says, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. We want to pick the lens. We want to lock in the answer. We want to control the outcome. But God is the one adjusting the prescription. We plan, He establishes. We choose what looks better, and He knows what it actually is. And sometimes spiritual maturity is learning to trust the great physician when He flips the lens and says, how about this one? Is this better? Now, there's something powerful about that final lens adjustment at the eye doctor. You're like 1 or 2, and suddenly it clicks, the blur sharpens, the letters stop running together, and you didn't realize how unclear everything was until you have that clarity. That's what this entire Double Vision series has been about. Now, week 1, we learned how to look backward correctly. Not glorifying the past, not getting stuck in it, but remembering God's faithfulness with gratitude. In week 2, we talked about things that we needed to learn before we go forward, lessons that God has told us at Trinity that we need to learn before we can even take the next step forward, about the future. We talked about letting go of what God has already removed, about how sometimes we're trying to grab chains that God has already broken. And we come to the finale, the final lens adjustment. Now, this is about the future, not the version you scripted, not the one on your vision board, not the 5-year plan you wrote on December 31st for 2026, but the future that God sees. Because you can't walk confidently into tomorrow if you're still trying to control tomorrow. Proverbs 16:9, in their hearts human plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Solomon wrote that. And if anyone understood planning, it was Solomon. He built cities, trade systems, a temple. Planning is not wrong, it's wise. A lot of the Proverbs talk about what is wise. Planning is a good thing. The Hebrew word for plan carries the idea of calculating, designing, inventing, but establishes means to firmly set in place, to secure, to make stand. You can design, but only God can secure. You can draft the blueprint, but God is the one who pours the foundations. If you've already lived long enough, you already know this. You plan to be somewhere else right now. You plan that relationship that would last. You plan the opportunity at work. You plan that diagnosis would be different. You planned, but God directed. Double vision maturity says, I will plan, but I will surrender the pen. And then we go to the New Testament. We go away from the wisdom literature, and we go to James, who is talking about serious discipleship in James chapter 4, 13 through 15. It says, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. He says, why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. And that feels sharp until you understand who he's writing to. These were Jewish Christians scattered under persecution. Many were merchants. They were entrepreneurs rebuilding their lives in foreign cities. They were making plans to survive. So James he's not saying like, hey, productivity is bad. He's actually saying, hey, you know what is bad? It's presuming. In the Roman world, traveling merchants would speak confidently about future ventures as if tomorrow was guaranteed. And James is saying, you don't even control tomorrow. You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the word he used for mist is atmos. It's vapor. Like your breath on a cold morning. We've had a lot of those lately. It's real. It's visible. You see it, and then it disappears quickly. And now James isn't trying to make you depressed. He's trying to free you. Because when you realize that you are not sovereign, you cannot control everything, you finally let God be in control. He says, instead, you should say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and we will do this or that. Notice that phrase, we will live. Even breathing is God's grace. Double vision faith moves forward. It works hard. It dreams boldly. Beholds every dream with open hands. God, you can change this if it's not what you need it to be. We go back to the Old Testament. We come to a verse that everyone loves to quote. Everybody loves to put on graduation cards or after somebody gets married, or if there's a new venture coming up. Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." It's a great verse. I love that verse, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. People take this verse out of context and they make it mean that God will give me everything I want. God will never let me be sick. God will turn my bank account into $1 million tomorrow. I will succeed in everything I do because God is for me specifically. But Jesus actually promises in John 16, he says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So is God prophesying through Jeremiah? Is he wrong? Or is Jesus wrong? Is everything we're going to do going to succeed, or are we actually going to have troubles? It's both. Jesus promises trouble. Jesus doesn't promise success in everything. People leave the church and forget God if they believe that everything they do will be blessed. That's not what it means. We tend to read scripture individually instead of corporately. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you." Now in English, it sounds very personal to you specifically, like God is speaking directly to me through Jeremiah about my career, my success, my comfort. But in the original Hebrew, you is plural. I had a theology teacher. He would say, like, there is me, there is you, and in the South they say, there is y'all, as in a lot of people, and then all y'all is everybody. It's everybody. And that's what the original Hebrew you is. It's everybody in that context. God is speaking to a nation in exile. It's a covenant language to a people group, not personalized prosperity. It's not promising that to every individual. And many times we read it without the context. Verse 11 sits in the middle of a letter to the exiles in Babylon. Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple is gone, families are displaced. And in that moment, false prophets are saying, hey, don't worry, it's going to be a quick turnaround, you're going to be home soon, you're going to go back to where... And Jeremiah is saying, that's not what God is saying. Jeremiah is correcting them. He's saying, it will be 70 years is what God says. That means most of the original hearers would die in exile. Not a couple years like these false prophets were saying. So when God says, I know the plans I have for you, he's not promising immediate rescue, career advancement, or financial prosperity. He is promising faithfulness over a long arc of history. And we actually misunderstand the word prosper. That word translated prosper sounds really good, and it's a good marketing strategy for a lot of churches. But the Hebrew word here is shalom. In modern Western ears, prosperity or to prosper sounds like success. You're going up, you're climbing the ladder, material blessing, Rolls Royce, big house, gold toilets, whatever you think success is. But shalom means wholeness, it's completeness, it's peace rooted in right relationship with God. It's spiritual and it's a promise before it's actually about your circumstances. Babylon did not feel prosperous, and it wasn't prosperous for a long time. But God was still producing shalom, peace, through discipline, through purification, through preservation of the Hebrew culture. Our culture shapes how we read the Bible. We live in a success-driven society that equates blessing with visible results. We instinctively interpret a future and a hope as promotion, and we're going to be comfortable, we're going to have influence, we're going to have breakthrough. But biblically, hope is not optimism about circumstances. It's confidence in what we don't see, in God's faithfulness to his plan. The exile's hope wasn't everything's going to go well for me personally. It was God has not abandoned his covenant even when it feels like it has. Most Christians prefer promises that remove that tension. We like to make it easy. We want to take the easy step if we can. Humans love to do stuff easier, and it's not always bad. It's got a lot of technological advancements from people from finding easier ways of doing things. But many times shortcuts don't build the discipline, and that discipline like that doesn't build the disciple. And if we can do it easier or faster, humans will. People will figure out how to be lazy enough to get by. I saw a video and it was titled, "The Laziest Thing I Have Done to Not Move from Where I Was Sitting." It was story after story of people telling stories on Reddit. I saw this on TikTok, and someone said they didn't want to get up to turn the light off to go to bed, but they had a Nerf gun and 10 darts. And they shot the Nerf gun to hit the light switch and turn it off, and they missed all 10 times, went to sleep with the lights on. Another person said they didn't want to go get their college book, their textbook from downstairs, so they found a sketchy place online where they could download the book illegally. I'm not condoning that, but so they didn't have to get up. And someone else didn't want to turn their light switch off, so they used their laser pointer to get their cat to jump up onto the wall and hit the switch on the way down to turn off the light. And people still do it. We've probably done some lazy things too. Some things you're like, I'm not going to say anything, but I've been super lazy before. But Jeremiah 29:11, out of context, it feels like that taking that shortcut. It feels like a blanket guarantee that every step we take will succeed. Every step we take will succeed. But the surrounding verses tell them to build houses in Babylon, plant gardens, marry, have children, and seek the peace of the city that they didn't choose. It's not instant blessing. God is telling them, you're going to be living here for a while. Dig in, take root, make a family. That's faithful obedience in an uncomfortable season. And so why do people think it means that everything turns to gold when we read that? Because we read it through the lens of individual prosperity instead of God's promise of faithfulness. We read it without the exile in view. We translate shalom into success. And we naturally want to know that our personal plans will work. But Jeremiah 29:11 is actually more powerful than that. It doesn't promise that everything you touch will succeed. It promises that God will redeem everything to grow us. He's going to encourage us. He's going to push us into maturity with him. Those things will not fail, even if your circumstances don't look like success. It may not seem like success, but it's working out for God's glory, not yours. God isn't promising your plans will succeed. He's promising his plans will succeed. So that means we should follow God and everything will work out in the end. Not for your personal benefit all the time. God does reward and God does bless. I'm not saying he doesn't, but it's less to do about the financial and about the comforts and getting ahead, and it has more to do with the spiritual blessing of trusting God in trouble. The trouble brings us to God, and God brings redemption to the trouble. So what does double vision look like at the end of this series? It means you begin to see how God sees you, not defined by your worst moment, not limited by your past, Not trapped by your current season, you see what God sees in you. When Israel saw exile, God saw refinement. When they saw defeat, God saw preservation. When they saw delay, God saw preparation. And you begin to see what a future with God actually looks like. It might include waiting. There might be some detours. It might include some closed doors you don't understand. But it'll always include His presence. Proverbs reminds us that He establishes our steps. James reminds us that life is a vapor. Jeremiah reminds us that His covenant promises stand. And the New Testament reminds us that the ultimate future isn't your promotion, your retirement, or comfort. It's the resurrection. Your greatest future isn't a 5 or 10 year plan. It's eternity with Christ. And that reframes everything. But here's the tension that we have to live in. We plan, but God directs. We dream, but God defines. We want clarity, but God gives trust. Double vision isn't about predicting the future. It's about trusting the one who already stands in the future. Maybe today the blur isn't your past anymore. Maybe it's your tomorrow. You're anxious, you're uncertain, you're trying to force clarity. But the final adjustment is this. It's stop trying to see the whole staircase. Trust the one who sees the top. Plan, but surrender. Move and do things, but submit them to God. Dream, but trust God if it changes. In the waiting, hope. Because God's future for you is not fragile. It doesn't depend on your perfect execution of everything. It depends on His perfect character. And He has never once failed His covenant. So here's the question that ends this series. When you look at your future, are you trying to control your future? Or are you trusting the God who already holds your future? Double vision faith remembers. It expects. It releases the things that we don't need to hold on to. And it surrenders tomorrow. And when you finally see that clearly, all the blurriness disappears. Not because you understand everything, but because you trust the one who does. You know what I've realized at the eye doctor? At the end of the appointment, after all the 1 or 2, 3 or 4, better or worse, all those questions, all that lens flipping back and forth, after all the uncertainty, you don't walk out with perfect vision immediately. You walk out with a prescription. You still have to wait for the glasses. You don't leave seeing 20/20. You leave trusting the doctor. And that's the Christian life. God doesn't always hand you full clarity about your future. He hands you a prescription called trust. You don't leave this room today knowing every step of the next 5 years. I can't predict that. You leave knowing the one who establishes your steps. Again, we go back to Proverbs 16. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Then Solomon writes later in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 2, it says, try using this as a thesis statement and see how many people stick around. He says, meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. That's not a verse we put on pillows or coffee mugs or on a t-shirt. I think I would wear it if somebody got it. It's scripture. After 12 chapters of King Solomon writing how meaningless everything is, he ends the book of Ecclesiastes with verse 8 of chapter 12. He goes back to the beginning, the thesis statement. You bring it back together. Meaningless. Everything's meaningless. Then you skip to verse 13. It says, now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commands, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Proverbs says we plan, but He establishes. James says our life is a vapor. Jeremiah reminds us that His plans are promises. They're bigger than our timeline, deeper than our comforts, stronger than our detours. And Ecclesiastes reminds us that everything outside of following God and His commands, outside of that, everything's meaningless. And here's what's beautiful. When you finally get those glasses from the doctor, when you look back years later, you realize he was adjusting them the whole time. That relationship didn't work. Lens adjustment. That door closed. Lens adjustment. That season of waiting that you hated. Lens adjustment. He wasn't blurring your life. He was correcting your vision over time. And one day, not just metaphorically, but literally, one day our faith will become sight. One day there'll be no more blurriness. One day we will see him face to face. And until then, double vision faith says this: I will plan, but I'll trust God. I will move, but I'm going to surrender it to God. I don't need to see everything clearly. I need to trust the doctor who does. So maybe the final question of this series is simple. When God flips the lens and asks better or worse, will you trust him with the answer? Because clarity is not found in controlling the future. It's found in trusting the one who already is in the future.